possible and giving us an opportunity to network together and discuss important and dynamic topics of our industry. I'm certainly privileged to be here with you, Marco Daura. Have been in healthcare for a very long time, and we'll get to some intros soon. First, I want to welcome our esteemed panelists as well to join and share their stories and their experiences with us today. So thank you, Anesso. Thank you, Chris, for joining our panel as we focus our conversation on healthcare specifically and what blockchain can do for healthcare. I'm going to turn it over to you guys for a quick, just let us know a little more about yourselves. Anesso, for a quick intro, is the CEO and co-founder of Meta Digital, and basically, in putting it very simply, it's a convenient way to digitally verify prescription drugs. And I think recently you've added a deductible copay function for notification with pharmacy and whatnot. So that's great and exciting. Want to hear your story. We also have Chris Ingrao, COO of Lumedic, where they've been focusing on a platform that focuses on more transparent healthcare transactions and experiences for payers, providers, and patients, and also focus on patient digital identification and registration. So we'd love to hear their stories. What I'll say, Anesso, we'll start with you, is if you can please give us your background intro and let us know sort of what you're passionate about. And if you were to close your eyes and imagine yourself somewhere else today, where would it be? Just to let us know a little more about yourself. And then we'll, yeah.
Okay, so if I were to imagine myself somewhere, I'll probably say the Egyptian pyramids. That would be nice. You know, it's
nice.
Cold, yeah. You know, so
I love it.
Yeah, so just to talk about at least personal, do we talk about ourselves or going to our companies? What do we talk about? Ourselves?
Yeah, a little bit about your background, and
okay.
we'll get into your companies later, but yeah, your background, short and sweet.
Yeah. My name is Anisu Machoko. I'm the CEO of Meta Digital. My background is in actuarial mathematics. I'm an actuary by training. I've worked in a number of insurance companies early in my career, went back to school, did my graduate program at Schulich School of Business, an MBA and a master's in financial engineering. And then I took a sharp turn into the VC world, which was kind of exciting. And we, kind of got interested in technologies like blockchain and AI. So a lot of times it has been a passion of mine researching about not just projects in healthcare, but blockchain solutions that are going to have impact in finance, in other aspects of our lives. So that's what I usually spend my time doing, and I usually like reading books. So reading books is fun for me. Myself, nice. So technology books are always great. Books about leadership are also interesting because it feels like you have a mentor sometimes with you. And finally, in terms of what I like to do outside, I like running in the morning. So usually, one fun fact, I usually start my day at 4:30 in the morning, and I usually run. And it's an interesting thing that one of my friends told me. So this could be something you can take from anything I say. And he said, if you start by running in the morning at that time when it's very difficult, if you are successful in your first event, your day will go very well. So in most cases, it usually does. But, so that's an interesting thing that I just like. So that's a little bit about me.
Right. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Anesso. That's definitely insightful in terms of your early morning runs. Chris, how about yourself? Quick intro and background and passion, and where would you be if you close your eyes?
Sure, yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Ingrao. I run strategy and operations for a company called Lumedic, which is a technology company owned by Providence, which you might be familiar with if you're from the local area. Providence is one of the nation's largest health systems, operating over 50 hospitals, over 1,000 different ambulatory care settings. We have an internal payer as well. and we operate over 7 states. Lumedic was by Providence a few years ago because we had built a platform, as Marco mentioned, which is designed to streamline the communication between parties. So we have 2 different domains. One is a B2B side of the business. So you can think about this as using distributed ledgers to automate transactions between payers and providers for things like claims processing or prior authorization. The other side of the house is using distributed ledgers and decentralized identity to do things like patient intermediated exchange of information. So from a business to a individual to another business. And you can think of a pattern there as registration, where when you go to a doctor's office today, you typically present 2 pieces of identification, one identification like a driver's license, and a second is an insurance card. That process is designed so that the providers can create a coverage record to understand exactly what that patient's coverage and accumulator status and copays and all of these kinds of things. All of that happens behind the scenes with a very complex set of siloed data systems and third parties and manual processes. And so by taking that information from a payer and giving it to an individual in a trusted and secure way so that they can share it, that can simplify the process drastically. So that's what Lumedic is all about. Personally, before I'm a co-founder of Lumedic, before starting the company, I ran a digital transformation division of an international tech services firm based out of Switzerland called Luxoft, which is now part of DXC, which is the former HP. So I have a bit of a technology background going in a long and boring past. If I were to envision where I would rather be right now, I think I would like to be in Hawaii on a beach somewhere where it's warm and I can be outside.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing, Chris, as well. So I'll be brief myself, introduce myself, and then we can dive right in. I'm Marco Daura. I have a little over 20 years in healthcare. I worked in different areas in healthcare, from medical devices to health informatics, digital health, from engineering to sales and marketing within the healthcare sector, big companies, and my share startups as well. I joined Primera, the Innovation Test Kitchen team, about a little over a year ago. It's been my first opportunity to learn about the payer space, right? The insurance space, whereas before it was more on product, the provider, the patient, and policies, but now sort of the payer perspective as well. Certainly, I appreciate. I'm passionate about mentoring, advising, and connecting startups, and I do that in different ways through Cambia Grove, through a startup spotlight program at Primera, through the UW Commotion Labs, and other means of how I volunteer and advise startups. So I love to connect the community of entrepreneurs and innovators in the health tech space. If I were to close my eyes now with the beautiful sun peeking through the window here, I'd love to be either drifting the Yakima River fly fishing for a day, or maybe backpacking for a few days in the Cascades. I love the outdoors. So I share that with you, Chris, as well, being out. But it wouldn't hurt to be on top of the pyramid either. All right. Okay. So thank you again all for joining this session, for listening to the conversation. We're going to dive in. And please feel free to enter any questions you have in the chat session that we have available at certain points. Maybe we'll stop and we'll pause a little bit and take note of your questions and address them.
Yeah, but, I'll be monitoring the chat. So
perfect. Yeah. Thank you, Ellen.
Bring up any questions that seem important, but otherwise the questions will be saved until the Q&A at the end. So, yeah.
Excellent. And Ellen is going to be our Zoom police, helping us do the right things.
basically.
Thank you, Alan.
Mhm.
So let's get started a little bit. We've learned a little about your, short stories background, both Anesu and Chris. Let's dive in a little bit in terms of the healthcare industry, and it's a large ship, and it moves slow. It has a lot of moving parts. Can each of you describe a little bit the process of how you identified areas where blockchain can bring value, and what was your process in looking at the low-hanging fruit, if you will, in this industry, so you're not taking a big bite that you cannot chew, right? So what has been your process in addressing, at a high level, we're going to get into some detailed questions later, the healthcare industry. Chris, we'll start with you.
Sure, thanks, Marco. So my experience might be a little bit different than some others in that, the first thing to say about healthcare is it's all about care coordination. When you go to get care, it is very rarely about you and your provider anymore. That was the old model of, hundreds of years ago. You would show up, the doctor would treat you, you would pay them some money, and you would go away, and that would be the end of the encounter. Today, whether it's insurance companies or multiple different types of providers providing you services, there is a tremendous amount of coordination of different groups in order for you to get the care that you're provided. And because of that, priority has been placed on making sure that your experience is as seamless as possible. And so you don't see all of the back end information that has to flow between various parties in order to make this possible. So when you start to take a step back and get access to crack open the systems, there is no shortage of opportunity for changing the way we exchange information today. So to answer the question of low-hanging fruit, I think there is so much low-hanging fruit. It's a little bit like the gold rush in a way where you can kick nuggets around. So that's not the problem. For us, what we had the advantage of being owned by Providence. And so rather than us selecting maybe the easiest or the low-hanging fruit because we had some commercially, demanding timeline, we were provided priorities from the health system. So Providence said, hey, these are the three most important things for us. Are these the kinds of things that can be solved with distributed ledgers? And if they can, will you tackle them? So it was a little bit different for us. But that's how we landed at the set of services that we offer.
Which in a way helps open certain doors for you that normally if you were on your own, you'll struggle. And yeah, you may pick certain easier ones to get your foot in the door, but this is certainly an opportunity for you to explore the space in a different way with a big health system supporting that. So certainly we can appreciate that. And so from your side, you can tell us a little more about sort of MetaDigital and how does that fit in, and then lead into, what was your process in identifying the areas that you wanted to tackle, and what did you determine to be your niche, or how you did that? Is Anesu with us? I just want to make sure, or maybe you're on mute. Oh.
Anesu dropped at some point. I'm not sure where he is, if he is having issues with his video or audio.
We'll come back to him. We'll come back to him then.
He has not contacted me in any way.
Okay. Well, hopefully we don't have a storm outside today. I know we did have one yesterday, but hopefully he'll be able to chime in back soon. Okay. So in terms of, if Chris, if you can share with the audience here sort of what was your method about identifying health organizations or healthcare cohort organizations, whether it's on the provider side, the payer side. How did you look at taking something to the next level when you wanted to do pilots, projects, and get your solution closer to a customer? So how did you do experiments, if you will, even to learn about how you can bring a change to the place? Because that's basically the biggest challenging thing in healthcare is how do you bring innovation? You're introducing change specifically when we talk about legacy systems, the past, and where we want to be in the future. So yeah, if you can talk a little bit about your pilots, your projects, how you were able to get it in the hands of users so that you can get some idea.
Yeah, sure. So in our case, we spent a fair amount of time doing some education of the various stakeholders. And within a health system, there are a lot of stakeholders, right? So we have stakeholders on the IT side who own the systems and the processes by which we share information today. We have stakeholders on the business side. If it's on the clinical side, you have a set of stakeholders. If it's on the administrative side, you have a different set of stakeholders. But often the function requires a bit of both. So if you are talking about making a change, then you have to sort of make sure that all of those stakeholders are educated on what the change might be. In our case, what we found was pilots are difficult in a healthcare organization because you have to get pretty close to the core production systems without operating on the production data. And so there's usually a fairly lengthy period of time before before you get the right access to build against the test systems that are involved. And so that's just a necessary process to go through security reviews and those kinds of things, and get everybody on board. There's an educational perspective or activity that's necessary for people to be comfortable with what it is that you're doing. And because blockchain is, the word itself can be scary to people given what they've read or what they understand. You have to be careful about educating people within the context that they understand. And so in some cases, you don't want to mention distributed ledger and blockchain. In other cases, you have to go super deep. Just depends on the audience.
And that's a great, maybe a little segue here is, while we're waiting for Ernesto to hopefully join us soon before we move on, give him a chance to catch up. But I think you explained it pretty well, Chris, in the sense that you always have to cater the way you articulate whatever solution you're working on in the space, in different ways, depending on who your audience is, right? So if we wanted to simplify what blockchain is for healthcare, or what blockchain is as a technology, how would you describe it in very layman's terms? It is a means to an end. It's a technology that enables services and values that we have to certainly articulate, but how would you describe it in a very simple way, blockchain?
Yeah, we usually try to address that with maybe the broader context of distributed ledgers as opposed to blockchain specifically, because I think sharing with people how distributed ledgers work specifically, multiple parties share visibility to exactly the same data is more of a comforting story than it is a challenging story. So lots of times, because these organizations are familiar with the importance of care coordination, they're used to exchanging data, but the way they exchange data is through third parties today that have to do this transformation, because the way that we write Chris Ingrao in our source systems is different than the way somebody else writes Chris Ingrao in their source systems. And therefore we have to go through an intermediary, and everybody sort of gets the idea of, man, that's an unnecessary burden if we could have a common set of data that we could agree on. And so I think we try to land, excuse me, the idea of distributed ledgers first, and then we can talk about blockchain specifically if they're relevant to the particular offering. So when we start to talk about things like decentralized identity, where a blockchain is important, then we can talk about that specific use case, why the blockchain aspect is important to that. And then you can get into the discussion around public versus private, permission versus permissionless, all of protocol, consensus protocol, and all those things that start to get a little bit murkier for people. So this is, again, slicing the context a little bit, which is, I think it's super helpful to think about the explanation like you would with your kids. You're going to explain something to your 5-year-old differently than to your 15-year-old. And we try to meet people a little bit of where they are on these topics.
No, great. I enjoyed the way you explained it and sort of differentiated some of the terms in this technology space. I think we still don't have an SO, so let's continue here.
Okay.
I'm gonna, yeah, and let's just to give a heads up to listeners as well. If you need to mute the mic, Chris, feel free. Just let everyone know. Chris has a little bit of a cough, so there we go. So yeah, feel free. Don't worry about it. I'm gonna provide a little bit of some colorful comments on my side. I've certainly been in healthcare before we do a deeper dive here in this conversation, but I've been in healthcare for a long time, and I've seen it evolve. It doesn't evolve as fast as we expect things to evolve with regards to technology coming in. And I've learned through times that with healthcare, you have to demonstrate, you have to experiment in small sprints and grow. Everything has to tie in back to the clinical applications that matter when we talk healthcare. At the end of the day, what's the value to the different constituents in healthcare, whether it's the provider, the payer, the purchaser, different parties. And sometimes you can come up with a solution that helps all of these entities connect and talk better to each other. And blockchain certainly could be one of those enablers. But to implement it in healthcare, in real healthcare workflow and applications and protocols, that's sort of where the change management comes in. And it's a process to take the ideation piece all the way through commercialization. You could have a great go-to-market strategy, yet be aware that it's highly regulated industry and the ship moves a bit slow. So certainly now when we begin into some of the methodology about how we can have blockchain as an enabler in this space. First, I think, Ellen, I'm not sure if you're with us live, but we have a question. So maybe we'll tackle the question before we check again and see if Inesu has joined us.
Yes, Inesu is still not here.
Okay. Okay. So we have a question from Kate Trout. I'd like to hear more about the services, products, et cetera, that span beyond the specific companies that maybe our panelists represent. For example, if we do KYC as an industry, we need buy-in. Any steps in that direction? How would you take that, Chris?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think one of the things that we are starting to see is when we transition from centralized governance authorities to decentralized governance authorities, a question that lots of people ask is where do we go for certain answers to certain services or support for various things? And I think KYC, in my mind, comes up here as well. So one of the organizations that I'm familiar with that is assisting with organizational KYC for onboarding of organizations into some sort of community or excuse me, network is an organization called GLIF, G-L-E-I-F. GLIF is Global Legal Entity Identification Foundation, I believe. It's an organization that's about 10 years old, and it started out in the financial services business where KYC is really important. And it wasn't initially built using something called decentralized identity, but they are now moving in a pattern towards enabling verifiable credentials of these legal entity identifiers. And so I believe that, different than what some of us are used to in the traditional models of KYC, I think this digital version that is validated with verifiable credentials is a very powerful thing that is moving into the space of at least legal entities, non-individuals, of course, at this point in time. But that's That's an organization that we are leaning on our services for onboarding other organizations into our community as a way to assist us in the validation of the efficacy of the organization. I hope that helps answer the question.
And certainly, Kate Trout, if you have a follow-up on that, please chime in on the chat. We can take the next question as well. Oh, so you do. So how about for individuals then, Chris? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, for individuals, I think this is where this notion of digital identity becomes really powerful. And there's lots of organizations talking about verifiable credentials and digital identity. I ascribe to a certain viewpoint, along with, I would put me in a certain category that believes that verifiable credentials is the right pathway to identity. Some people refer to that as self-owned identity or self-sovereign identity. And the idea there is that your individual information will live on your mobile device and on your mobile device alone, essentially, in addition to the organizations that you share the information with. And by doing that, you get out of the world that we're in today where, we started out with this account-based thing where every organization you have a relationship with, you have to create a net new account. And then that got crazy and people said, well, we need federation. And so instead, create one account with, Facebook or Google or whatever it is, and then they will federate your login in all these other places. And that will simplify your life a little bit. And I think that was a logical step, but I think where we're going is in the limit, individuals control their identity completely. And when they log in and create a relationship with an organization, they have control over what information they share and don't share. And so as long as the organization can validate certain characteristics about the individual, they can have high confidence for their KYC process. So as an example of that, you in healthcare, we have this thing called selective disclosure, which you probably know, where we should only ask for the information absolutely necessary for the function. And this becomes extraordinarily powerful when you start to think about answers to certain questions. So as an example, a provider might only need to know that I, as an individual, the holder of this identity, whatever that identity is, has the right to a service and that the provider will get paid for that service. That information can be provided in a much more concise way without oversharing information. And so I think once we have this digital identity model built, I think that will address a lot of these KYC for individual components. There's a lot there. I probably can't answer it in the time we have.
Exactly. And you and I have had conversations on this with identity and sort of the holy grail with this is, can it be a single identity, like you're saying, that could be shared, decentralized, but then shared with every other, wherever it's needed from one common identity record, if you will. And then could it become universal, right? That's the other thing. I mean, first thing is state, then country, then universal, global. But where the individual can be in control of that identity and as you said, and decide what they want to share and what they don't want to share at the time of service, if we're talking about healthcare. And to your point with selective disclosure, that's very important because then, often the question is, well, is blockchain safe? Is it secure? Well, you can make it whatever you want, just like any other technology, right? You can build all these security services on top of it and enforcing functions on top of it, right, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, the security and safety thing is an interesting question. I think most people are comfortable that modern cryptography provides greater security than centralized databases. I think most people get that now, and we don't hear a lot of challenges. Every once in a while, you'll hear somebody ask you about quantum computing, and okay, fine. If somebody wants to use quantum computing cycles to hack my personal information, maybe we have a risk, but it's not really a concern today. I think,
Yeah.
So I think people are comfortable with that. I think we also use the security modality in mobile phones today. So, where biometrics and these kinds of things secure and associate that phone to you. And so if we're comfortable with that mechanism, that's a pretty common model that we use on security.
Yeah, yeah. Let me check quickly if we have, no, we don't. Okay, so let's continue. Apologize, folks. It must be that Ernesto had some challenging technical difficulties and he's dropped off, and we'll keep waiting. If he joins us, then we can check back with him. But just to continue here, I think briefly I mentioned, Chris, you alluded to it, blockchain is a technology. It's an enabler. It's a service beneath the value that we want to bring out to our consumers, or in this case, the patient and the provider, because they're both going to benefit. In many cases, the user doesn't really care what the technology underneath is, but they certainly need to know about the value. However, they'll have questions, they're confused. Blockchain is a big thing. And Chris, you explained sort of what it is and how it can be articulated better. But how do you see this dynamic affecting adoption of blockchain in healthcare solutions? So we know there's a little stigma, there's a little education that needs to happen. We know that we can do a better job articulating the value that it brings in. At the end of the day, it's technology, just like when internet was the technology 18 years ago, right? The new technology, the web. So yeah, what's your thoughts on how can adoption come to place in healthcare with blockchain? What's your thought process on that?
Yeah, I think that healthcare is pretty conservative, as you know. I mean, but I will tell you that I think people in healthcare have a hunger for innovation. I think that they are embarrassed that they still use fax machines. So there's an appetite for sure to do something more innovative. We're not finding resistance, but when you start to talk about people's lives, there is a tendency to be really careful on making changes to things. And so I think my view on this is that we need to continue to advocate for the value that is differentiated value, that is something different that we can provide because of the technology, as opposed to leading with or really making the technology a key part of the discussion. So if blockchain allows us, or distributed ledger allows us to do something different and better, that is the approach that we tend to take until it gets to the IT folks, because ideally that's really the only group that needs to understand the details around how the solution works. So that might be my answer. There's a question here, Marco, around performance and scalability. Do you want to try and take that?
Sure. Yeah. Since we're talking about adoption, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and we have significant concerns around this, and we're spending a lot of time on our side to make sure that the solutions are scalable. I think different technologies have different sort of parameters associated with the scalability and performance. We don't have a big problem with our technology on the B2B side. On the B2C2B side, the patient intermediated exchange that I shared about, there's more of a delay in exchanging some of that information when you are obtaining and sharing verifiable credentials than the immediacy that we're used to today. It's not 10 seconds of delay, but it's not tap the button and get the information. And so we have to do a lot of work on our side on user experience, so that the individuals that are using the application are comfortable that that it's functioning. It just takes an extra breath or two before the transaction is complete.
Yeah, it's not
But
instantaneous.
it's a valid concern.
Yeah, yeah. And do you think that delay is because of what is it? What is causing that not instantaneous experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just that it has to do with the nodes and the protocol themselves to make sure everything's updated and everything's validated, and so it just isn't. It's not simply a call to a database with returning a value and you're done. There's more to it than that, and so. We are not building underlying architecture. We are using, I'd say, best of breed of commercial systems. And so those providers are working hard to improve performance, and we'll just, bake that into our solutions. But we live more at the application layer than those lower levels. So we're kind of doing the best we can, and trying to surround the users a little bit with user experience cues, so that they're not feeling like the spinning wheel forever kind of thing.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chris. KMC, I hope that gave a little more insights on performance and scalability. And if you have additional questions or comments, please add them into the chat. We'll hop in and out of the chat to address some of these comments and questions, folks. And Chris, you and I have talked about this sort of that whole patient experience, the past and the future, but we're also in a situation now this year with the pandemic where, we've seen accelerants to technology due to the pandemic on the positive side. And then you alluded to that user experience that certainly has to be worked on. How do you see that these experiences taking shape into the future? For example, if you can walk us through how would a patient benefit from blockchain being empowered to control their own identity? I know you and I talked about these different models when they go to the clinic to check in and registration, all of that. Can you walk us through that patient journey that is valuable for both, actually? I will say for three, for provider, payer, and patient.
Sure. Excuse me. I think that, when I first started to explain this notion of verifiable credentials, this idea that an individual can store their own personal health information on their mobile device and control it and share it with whomever they choose. When I was explaining this to my mother, her immediate response was, "Wow, that's great. So when I'm traveling internationally, if I get sick, I can go into a facility and I can share information with them that they're not going to have the ability to go and pull all of this information from all of these different providers in my past." And so she was thinking about this portable EHR. That's exactly where her mind went. And it's a terrific long-term use case, whether you think about building an EHR on a mobile device or that set of data that you start to collect over your various healthcare experiences builds to something like the 80-20 rule, where you have the latest test results and you have the latest information about your experiences. That's going to be the information that's likely top of mind or top of need for the next provider you interact with. They often don't need the history from 30 years ago. They need like the last 5 or 10 years or something. And so the more interactions you have, the more that information will be readily available. And so in terms of the journey, you can think about that. We've talked about registration, that journey to make things simpler when you just check in. That'll be better for you, better for the provider, better experience, but then also sharing this information. There's been a lot of discussion around things like COVID credentials for travel or access to various things. And that's a small example of where you might have some piece of your health information that you can share outside of even just healthcare that streamlines some function, whether that's sharing your kid's vaccination, with the school, and today that's pretty painful, or whether it's sharing a vaccination result or a test result so that you can travel. All of these things are examples of where we take our health information and use it in our lives in other ways. And by having individuals have that information, the portability is enabled, because today Delta Airlines doesn't have a connection to Providence's Epic infrastructure to go query information about Chris Ingrao. So how do we make sure that the information that Chris presents to Delta Airlines, they can validate that it is in fact true, it came from Providence, and it has a certain result that allows me to get on that plane. And that's, I think, an example of where these public blockchains allow for a verifiable check, so the authenticity of an individual's information can be utilized. The idea of just giving an individual information on their phone, that's not necessarily unique or novel. It's how does the downstream party trust that it hasn't been altered in any kind of way?
Trust.
And the only way to do that really is a verifiable credential, which is this public blockchain that you can check and make sure it's signed and cryptographically and all of these kinds of things. And so I think I think by putting the patient in control of that information, we will unleash all kinds of new patterns because of the portability aspect.
I love it. I think sort of, if I were to summarize what you said, because of the verifiable credentialing abilities, will build that trust. And we're talking about an immunity passport, so to speak, right? I mean, that gives also the patient the control to unleash these, gives the industry ability to unleash additional features, but gives the patient the control to do that, right?
That's right, yeah.
And now sort of we're talking specifically with the immunity passport because of what we're learning from the pandemic, and how can we, if we can have a trusted way that helps patient have that record on them and wherever they go, whether they're traveling, school. So that's huge. Do you think is there a talk about an immunity passport coming to reality, Chris?
Yeah, and there's been a lot, even in the last week, there's been a lot of different organizations announcing their version of an immunity passport. We also support this function from our platform. Excuse me. Although our platform is much more about connecting between healthcare organizations. It's less about a COVID specific use case. Yeah. But it does support a COVID use case because it's simply a test credential that you give to an individual. Yeah. I think that the concerns on this today are those of digital divide. And so when people start to talk about things like immunity passports, people get really concerned that only people with smartphones might be able to benefit from access. So here's where you start to run into issues where the technology is possible, and it would provide value to a certain set of the population. But we have another set of the population, maybe poor and vulnerable populations, or just certain groups that might not have cell phones. I think the latest stat that I saw was something like 18% of the US does not have a smartphone. And there are certain demographics that you might expect this to happen. But these are the kinds of, I think, policy, you start to run into some other concerns here on the deployment of these solutions. But I think that we will absolutely see immunity credentials coming to fruition very, very soon, because people are already announcing. And of course, we have a solution that is in place today within Providence that works. So the tech is there.
That's great. Alan, I want to check in with you and folks. Is it okay if we can get the consent and take a screen grab, or whoever is attending the session today, so we can later post something on LinkedIn or whatnot. Are you guys okay if you want to turn on your videos? I could take a screen grab, take an opportunity while we're still wrapping things. So I think we still have 5 minutes or so. Unfortunate that Anesu is not with us, but smile for those who want to be on the camera. All right, thank you guys. So let's continue here in the conversation. I think, do we have about 5 minutes left, Ellen?
Yeah, that would be fine. And then if there are any other questions, this would be a good time to get into it.
Okay. So let's wrap it up a little bit here. Any tips, Chris, from your side for those who are working in technology in general in the healthcare space, and specifically with blockchain or distributed ledgers? Any tips you have that would help them bring the solution to reality in terms of their approach, the way they bring it into healthcare, and the methodology and the process by which they do that? Any tips?
Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, I think we benefited from the acquisition early on, in that we had the full support of Providence's executive leadership team to work within the organization to transform certain functions. That is an enviable position that I'm really thankful for. I think rather than give maybe a glib answer that you should look to be acquired by a large healthcare organization so that you can transform from within, which if you can make that happen, you should do so.
That's a tip.
It's a huge advantage. And often those large organizations don't have the skills internally to do what you know how to do. So having an excellent team has value. So that would be one serious, but maybe not that helpful comment. The other thing I would say is, to the extent possible, I would remove the term distributed ledger or blockchain from anything that you say or do. And so I think what is helpful is to focus on what the differentiated value proposition of your solution is, such that it can't be accomplished in any other way. And make sure you land that point with folks, and almost treat blockchain like your secret sauce, that if you revealed it would be, to your disadvantage. I think if you put your head that way, it helps in crafting your message in a way that is more understandable for 95% of the stakeholders. I think that, we get, somebody tells us that blockchain's hot, so you guys should talk about blockchain, that you're a blockchain company. And I think that only makes sense to a certain audience. I think the rest of the folks, it's the wrong approach. And so maybe if a VC community has a certain amount of money they want to put to work on blockchain companies, you want to explain to them that you are built on a blockchain. That might make sense. But otherwise, I would focus on why this problem cannot be solved in any other way, and let that drive your business. Those would probably be the tips that I would offer.
Beautifully said. I'm taking notes too here for me for the future, but also I think with the follow-up session, we may get into some conversation as well. I want to open it up real quick here to the audience. And yes, that was a great tip, Chris. Thank you, K-Trout. If you have any other comments or questions, please chime in. There's no way we can have a fully comprehensive conversation on this topic for just an hour or under an hour. This is a huge thing, dynamic topic. Like Chris said, it's a technology, it's an enabler. It's if we focus on these differentiation elements of it, and why do we need it to get where we need to take healthcare, that's where the technology can come in and help. But please chime in if you have any other comments or questions before we conclude and wrap up here. I see, Ellen, that Anesu was not able to come back in. I hope everything is okay. I hope that cat or dog that he mentioned didn't barge in on him.
Yeah, I am not sure what happened with his access. Yeah, so
shall we just conclude this, and then is the next thing a breakout, or Ellen, or?
So the next thing is a breakout session. We don't have a very large group, so in the Slack conversation that's going on with the rest of the WTIA people, the discussion was about just keeping it in this group and just having it be one breakout session with everyone who is still here. I know, Chris, you can't make it, so it's fine if you need to drop. That is fine. We can just have it with everyone else who is here.
Yeah. Is the time, what is the time that we have for the breakout allotted? From 11:15 till?
Let me double check that.
I think if I look at my notes, from 11:15 to 12:15, so a full hour. Is that the discussion group, sort of? Okay, so it's up to us. We can see we do have a very small audience. Chris, thank you so much for being on the session with us. Thank you for addressing all the questions solely, because your co-panelist was not able to stay with us. So I appreciate it, especially with your voice and cough having been a little bit of a disadvantage for you, but thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to have participated. Thanks for everybody for the questions. Have a great day.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
And for those with us now, Ellen, can do they just chime in via chat or with audio as well?
With audio would be best. So before we do that, I can see that Kay Trout had one more question about incubation sessions.
Apologies.
I can just ask it directly.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
So thematic with my other questions, I think a lot of us that are in the WTIA are smaller companies. And I run the engineering org for a company, and I have like 30 people total. So I'm really curious what type of incubation sessions we can do, because to Chris's last point, I want it to be less about let's go use blockchain, right? And more about this is the healthcare business problem we have, and health and blockchain or whatever can solve it. And I think we need like-minded individuals that aren't in the same industries, but maybe come together for a purpose, like part of the WTIA, and that we have these conversations, what can we build together? Do we do an incubation session? Do you have engineers across that could build something together? Because, and I'll give you a moment to answer my question too, all of this is bigger than us. If we're going to use blockchain, KYC, anything within healthcare industry, people doing it in these little small pods is not going to do it.
Agree. No, I love the comment and the question, how do we do that? But just to clarify, when you say incubation sessions, I think we mean open innovation incubation sessions, right? Across the industry, across potential collaborators that can come in from different aspects and the different cohorts of healthcare. Could be represented by provider, payer, patient advocates, right? To talk about the user experience. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. Certainly. Ellen, would you be taking notes on this for these ideas, or? Yeah.
And let's talk scale for a second, Ellen, as you're maybe pitch this idea later. It could be everything from a 1 hour virtual happy hour where people just throw out ideas, show up, to then what sticks and how do we make that a real one day thing later, right? So it can start small, but I think getting really creative people together, different industries even too, to go after something from idea to if we can even start to build something and share it would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the WTIA has the Cascadia Blockchain Council, which is focused on blockchain for all, but specifically here for healthcare. Could we have that attention and focus with, since we have a huge community involvement in healthcare in the Seattle area. And now I want to ask you, are you in the Pacific Northwest or?
I am.
Okay, good. So that's helping the community get together and talk about an important dynamic topic. That's great. Yeah, so we'll take that on as a question to the WTIA and see what could be done there. Certainly, I'll bring it up as well. There's the Cambia Grove Health Tech Forum and hub, if you will. At Premera, certainly, I represent from Premera. You know, we've had different opportunities to engage and do open innovation with the Startup Spotlight, but this is different. I like the way you're proposing it for actionable incubation session where we can talk about these things from an engineering level, right? Or maybe from a valuable level to the consumer or patient. Any other comments or questions you guys would like to bring up? KMC, anything from your side additional to the questions that you brought up regarding performance and scalability? Sorry, I don't see your full name. We'll go back to, sorry, and Kate Trout, your first name is?
It's Katie.
Katie, thank
yes.
you. And Katie, just to maybe elaborate a little more, your focus is on health tech, right?
Yeah, so I'm with Vimley Benefit Solutions. We've been with the WTIA for very many years. I'm about to come up on my 1 year being at Vimley. I've been in insurance for most of my career, which is probably longer than I look. So like 20, 25 years at this point. A lot of property and casualty insurance. This is my first in the healthcare space, but we do like health benefits administration. So it is less about like health records per se, and more about like making sure people have their benefits, open enrollment, ID cards, things like that. Which is why I'm very interested in the KYC, because everything's so social security number driven still. And we all know that that's risky and it's not worth it anymore. There's too many other ways that you can identify folks. But again, not to like beat the same drum, but if I define a way to identify a customer and the rest of the industry doesn't pick it up, that's pretty hard.
Yeah. No, very, very well put and questioned. Well, this is a very small breakout.
And I'm not going to make you drag this out for me. I'm ready to exit stage right.
So
I was just going to give the other person one more chance to ask a question, but she may have also stepped away. I'm not sure.
Yeah. KMC, do we have you, if you can respond, just to let us know if, or you can put it in the chat just to make sure we do not forget about anything important that you brought up. If not, then Ellen, do you have any, do we conclude the session?
I would be fine with that. I mean, the topic of our discussion was
we don't want to drag it any longer than necessary.
Yeah, the topic of our discussion was supposed to be finding ways for healthcare to move faster with new innovations and a project we could do to help with that. But we kind of addressed that with Katie's idea. So I will post the notes that I took about that, send them over to Nick, and yeah, this was a very small little session.
That's all right. Small and mighty. I will add one more idea to that. And I didn't even know that was the breakout theme. So, you know, great minds think alike.
Yeah.
If we need a like more pointed example, if we do that follow-up, I think that the identification of people outside of the traditional mechanisms we use today, AKA not social security numbers.
Yeah.
Oh, someone is joining us.
Oh, let's see who is joining us. Hello, Naga. Did I pronounce that right?
Oh, perfect, Marco. How are you? Good. Good to see you.
Excellent.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank
How
you
are
for
you?
joining us.
Yeah.
Good,
Yeah.
good.
Thank you. Sorry. Yeah. Good
Do
to
you have
be.
any specific, we were talking about, remind us, what is the topic for the breakout session really, Ellen, here?
Yeah, I was looking for this healthcare. So
Yes.
I was
So,
so I came in to looking for some ideas and what has been happening in this area, in especially in healthcare and blockchain. So just looking at what your ideas
Yeah,
are.
we concluded our early panel session on focused on blockchain and distributed ledgers with for the healthcare, and we took some notes. And here we're just going to have an open dialogue. So the panelists are no longer with us, but we certainly have an audience. And if you have any questions or comments in terms of ideas or areas where you think we can take healthcare to the next step with technology, please bring them across. It's a very small audience that we have today here, but if you have any last comments, would love to take them in.
Yeah, just wanted to figure out, because I was working earlier in a healthcare kind of a startup, but with as you know, healthcare data is all confidential, secrecy, so many standards for different countries, different regions. So are there any ideas in terms of how we make the data confidential at the same time accessible for healthcare providers, as well as the actual member who is actually holding his data, right? So are there any ideas that we could think of? That is what I was trying to debate that.
Certainly. I think, Ellen, you're taking notes. We'll take that as a question back to the WTIA. But I think, yeah, this was lightly touched on today in the conversation earlier in terms of how do you empower the patient to not have manage and control their own identity, but then what other informations are attached to it, without talking about the technology enabler. We don't have to talk about blockchain and distributed ledgers, but if these technologies are allowing and empowering the patient to own their own identity, control it, and also what other information pieces are attached to it, and they can sort of selectively, because there's policies around this, as you mentioned, and be selective in what they're disclosing with the other party. If that technology enables these things, that's certainly the way forward. And our panelist, Chris Ingrao from Lumedic, spoke about that, yes, there's a lot of maybe perception that a certain technology is less or more secure than another, but at the end of the day, it's really secure. We're not going to build something that's built on insecure technology, but it's where you open the doors and access for the patient to how much they want to share, that control level, and how they can share when they're comfortable, when they have the trust element established.
Yeah, what we feel is for most of the use cases, you have to have periodic access at different times. Let's say you're going for a specific consultant or specialist and you want that data to be available for him to make a correct diagnosis. So he should be able to see that all the medical history for that point in time, but later on maybe he doesn't need. So that is also an additional requirement in typical healthcare scenarios. So
yeah, agree. Thanks for chiming in, Naga. Appreciate it. Are you from the Seattle area, Pacific Northwest, or where are you calling from?
Yeah, I'm from Vancouver, just north.
Vancouver. Okay, yeah, we consider that the Pacific Northwest.
True. We are all on the same side, right? So obviously, yeah.
Good. Well, thanks for chiming in.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, let's go back to KMC one last time before we see if we're going to
Sure.
conclude
Thank you.
this
Thank you,
session.
Marco. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Naga.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Well, it looks like, Ellen, we've taken note here, and shall we conclude this session?
That's fine with me.
Oh, sorry. Okay, never mind.
That's fine
Go
with
ahead,
me.
Ellen.
Mhm.
All right. Well, thank you, Ellen. Thank you, KMC. I don't see your full name or your first name. And appreciate you joining us. Take care.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.